Great. So he was a research scientist at the McDonnell Douglas Research Laboratory between 1998 and 1992 before joining the engineering faculty at Ohio State University between 1992 and 1999. From 1997 to 1998, he was a visiting Martin Luther King Associate Professor at MIT. He then moved to Princeton University as a professor of mechanical and aeronautical engineering between 1999 and 2016. Soboyejo was president and provost of the African University of Science and Technology in Abuja, Nigeria, between 2012 and 2014. He then returned to Princeton between 2014 and 2016 before joining the Worcester Polytechnic Institute as the Bernard M. Gordon Dean of Engineering and Engineering Leadership from 2016 to 2018. He became the senior vice president and provost from 2018 to 2022 and interim president from 2022 to 2023. Since October 2023, Soboyejo has served as the 7th president of the State University of New York Polytechnic Institute in Utica. He has authored 4 textbooks and more than 500 peer-reviewed journal articles. He is the recipient of 2 National Young Investigative Awards from the National Science Foundation and the Office of Naval Research, the Lamley Research Award from the Ohio State University, the Old Schools Award for Innovation from Princeton University, and Ralph Coates Medal of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. He was elected in 2021 as the member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering. Soboyejo is also a fellow of the Nigerian Academy of Sciences, fellow of the Nigerian Academy of Engineering, fellow of the Material Society of Nigeria, fellow of the African Academy of Sciences, fellow of the World Academy of Sciences, fellow of the American Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering, fellow of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. One of his accolades that he doesn't want talked about is that he was also an advisor to the United Nations Secretary General. That was, I think, Ban Ki-moon. Prof, we are very excited. We are very honored to have you. Please take us all.
Thank you very much, Desmond, and thank you, Tabiri, for organizing this special session. It's a real pleasure for me to be here to share with you a vision for the future. But before I do that, I just want to give you a brief description of my life. And so I would say the first half of my life, I spent trying to do work that the world could appreciate. And somewhere in there, I had a conversation with my mother, and she asked me a question that I couldn't answer. And so the question that she asked me was, what difference does your work make for the development of Africa? And when she asked me that question, which was now going back almost 30 years ago, I realized that it's not just what we do to earn a living that matters. It's really thinking about the impact, the work that we can have wherever we are across the world on the development of Africa. The other part of it that I realized is that we have to keep learning as the world around us changes. And so in my last 4 decades of work, what I've tried to do is every 10 years, I learn something new and I apply it to trying to solve in my own way, working with teams of people, the problems of Africa. And I'm going to give you some examples today of how I've used what I've learned in machine learning, working in teams with people to try to solve some of the problems of health, energy, and materials design. And I do this hopefully to try to inspire each and every one of us that's here to think about the context in which we live and think about how we can apply our knowledge through a brain circulation model to solving the problems of Africa. So it's really delightful for me to be part of this presentation with the Young African Scientist Group, who I see as the future of African science, to talk about how I have tried to weave together some of the things that we're doing today in our group, which is called the African Renaissance Institute. The African Renaissance Institute is simply a group of folks across the world, very established and newly established, trying to bring together the tools of science, technology, and innovation to address the challenges of Africa. Our initial goal when we were established in 2008 was to train future African faculty. And I'm delighted to inform you that Desmond Clenham, who introduced me today, was one of our initial cohort of students who today is one of our successful African faculty at Witwatersrand University. Our hope is that with the Young African Scientists Group, we can bring together leading African scientists, engineers, policymakers, and industrialists to interact with young African scientists in a new dialogue that can promote African development. So today I'm going to talk about AI for African development. As you know, we live in the era of the fourth industrial revolution, where AI is accelerating the pace of development and creating new possibilities for how we address problems of health, energy, and the environment. And I'll show you through our efforts how someone like me, who wasn't necessarily trained in this way, has engaged the field by working in teams. So I want to thank the folks in the Young African Scientists Group, and I also want to thank my collaborators. Those are folks really that have shared with me their knowledge, where we've come together as a team to solve problems. And you see in here faculty, you see postdocs, you see students that are really the basis of everything we do. In fact, the first example that I have for you, and I think the most important piece of advice that I have for you, is that you're as good as the team you work in. And when you work in teams, you can solve problems. So for me, what I've tried to do in the various topics that I've engaged is to ask the question, what is the purpose of our work? And it's not just about getting funding. It's really what are the local or global problems that we need to solve as Africans. And so we have problems of health, we have problems of energy, we have problems of water. Those are the problems of our time. And somehow we collectively, as a group of scientists and engineers, need to figure out what are those clear problems that we can tackle. Where's the demand? And so these have to be problems that somebody cares enough to support, for group activities that can really come together holistically to solve the problems. And what's the impact that we're trying to have on the local or global environment that we serve? So we believe that in each of these areas, we need to get groups of people together to work collectively on research and innovation that can really solve problems. We need to leverage education, such as the ARIST initiative tries to do, with young and emerging PhDs, and nurture them in a way that prepares them for life. And we also need to partner with industry, government, academia, and civil society to really form teams that can solve these problems. So for me then, as I look at the different problems, one of the things that we did after I had this conversation with my mother was to really ask the question, what are the diseases that kill Africans? It turns out that the number one killer of Africans is cardiovascular disease. The number two killer of Africans is cancer. And by the year 2030, cancer most likely will emerge as the leading killer of Africans. So it's worthy of study, as is cardiovascular disease. It turns out that malaria is not one of the biggest killers, but if you look according to the funders, you would think that it is. If you look at the energy sources and the energy availability, that's a crucial problem to many Africans. If you look at the infrastructure for roads and housing, that's a crucial killer. That's a crucial problem for many Africans. And perhaps our biggest societal deficit is the lack of value addition to our raw materials, which basically means we don't create enough wealth to serve our own people. So these in many ways motivate the work that we do, where we basically over the last 25 years have looked at cancer and ways of detecting and treating cancer, ways of purifying water at the point of use, ways of generating clean energy, and thinking also about energy storage, and also new ways of adding value to raw materials of different kinds to create infrastructure through the recycling of industrial and agricultural waste. So in each one of these areas, we have the opportunity to really create value by the application of AI. And I'm going to give you a few examples of how we've tried to do that in trying to find solutions to problems of health, energy, and really materials processing in ways that create value. Now, we do all of these things in a world in which machine learning, artificial intelligence across many domains is creating the opportunity to take vast amounts of data that are available in creating databases that enable us to then use those data to find new solutions. And I'm going to give you a few examples of how we can do that. I'll also talk a little bit about the opportunities that you have when you apply AI to problems of energy generation, energy storage, to problems of health in ways that give us a unique opportunity in this era to collaborate with computer scientists, to collaborate with engineers and social scientists to solve real problems. So let's start with this era of the fourth industrial revolution. Today, this idea of self-driving cars is real. Through cameras alone, cars that are autonomous can detect objects, detect and obey street lights, identify where and when to stop, interpret weather conditions, and even drive accordingly to environmental factors. All of this is often done through neural networks and sensors and machine learning and artificial intelligence in ways that we can be inspired about, in ways that we can apply to the development of real solutions. And so, as an example, I can look at the problem of green energy and solar energy and say that today we have silicon solar cells that have efficiencies of about 20%, at least in the crystalline form. Solar cells can be produced in PN junctions that can be stacked together. The real problem is that the factories to create these solar cells cost about $100 million or more to create. And so the question there is, can we create the next generation of solar cells using perovskites, which are relatively low-cost materials that can be solution processed? And if so, can we guide the design of those solar cells using machine learning as well as some theory to enable us to leverage the vast amount of data that's been generated across the world, as well as the knowledge of the physics, in ways that allow us to start small and grow an industry that can create those solar cells that are stable and efficient. And so what we're going to do here is explore this as a group by bringing people together to think about what's that scalable approach to the research that can enable us to be part of that solution. And if we can develop that solution, what's that approach that could take us to the transformation of a continent in terms of green energy sources? And so in this case, we're going to start with perovskite solar cells using those that have monovalent cations, methyl ammonium for medium ammonium, and cesium-based monovalent cations. We're going to look at the option of lead or tin as divalent cations, and we're going to look at halides, iodides, chlorides, or bromides as in the X position. Now, the key idea here is that you excite these with sunlight, the absorber layer, which has remarkable properties that were first discovered by Ujima, has remarkable absorbance. You excite into electron hole pairs that have to escape to the cathode or the anode without recombination. And so there's work to be done in the design of the absorber layers, as well as the electron transmission layers that take you to the anode or the whole transmission layers that take you to the cathode. So the machine learning problem here is in designing the absorber and potentially also in designing the ETL and HDL that take you to the electrodes in these systems. And what you want to do is, of course, reduce the extent of recombination in a way that enhances the lifetime. The other part of this is you want these solar cells to last a long time. So you need to understand the mechanisms of degradation in a way that allows us to really design these systems. So when one thinks theoretically about these systems, you can think about a Shockley-Queisser limit, which tells you something about the maximum efficiency that you can engineer in these kinds of systems. And you can see in the case of silicon solar cells, that's about 33%. In the case of gallium arsenide, it's about 33%. In the case of perovskites, it's about 32% theoretical efficiency. And if you look at what's actually been achieved experimentally, it's about 25.5% efficiencies of perovskite solar cells, which is great. In our lab, we've achieved about 23.6% photoconversion efficiencies, which is not too far behind the world record efficiencies. The real problem, though, is not just efficiency, it's really stability. And so can we, as a relatively small player, start off small and grow from this towards the idea of one day making solar cells? So like a lot of situations in semiconductors, it turns out that what really limits you is not just the theoretical ideal conditions, but the presence of defects. And so what we found in looking at our systems is that you have cracks, you have microvoids, all sorts of porosity in the system. And if you can manage to limit those cracks or defects, you can actually enhance the efficiency and the stability of these solar cells. And so one can begin to use computer vision for image analysis, linking with convolutional neural networks in ways that enable automatic object detection and segmentation, and begin to link this to the performance of the solar cells. And as you compare ground truths to predicted results, you can begin to develop a capacity to link process-related defects to performance characteristics that you can control. And you now get into an iterative process where you can essentially link these processes to defect distributions and performance characteristics in ways that allow you to begin to optimize these solar cells using machine vision and machine learning. And then you might then ask the question, what if I could close up some of these defects by applying pressure during manufacturing or during application? And so what we found is that if you apply moderate pressures to these systems, you can close up the porosity and close up the cracks. And in that way, you improve the photoconversion efficiencies. And you can also think about application contexts where you can begin to see that as you increase your pressure from zero pressure to moderate pressures, you close up the microvoids, you begin to close up the cracks. But above a moderate pressure of about 7 MPa, you start inducing other cracks due to the pressure application. And those are associated with a peak efficiency in our case of about 23.5%. So with these kinds of methods developed in the lab, we now have asked ourselves the question, can we take all the data that's really available in the literature for the compositions and processing parameters of these solar cells and bring them together into a framework where we can then begin to use different types of machine learning models to explore whether or not we can use these global databases to identify new compositions, new manufacturing parameters in ways that will allow us then to do the design of the next generation of solar cells. And so this is work that was done in collaboration with a number of people who work closely with us in our group. Elvish Tumasi was a scientist from the university, from Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, who visited us from Ghana, working with our team, with Joseph Otibio and others, to really put this database together, working also with Tabiria Sumadu and Desmond. And so with this kind of approaches, we can curate data, we can fill in missing values by imputation, and we can encode data in ways that creates a very robust database with thousands and thousands of data points obtained from work across the world. And you begin to explore different types of models. And so in this case, what we basically see is that many of the models give large dispersions where the predicted efficiencies are not necessarily consistent with the actual efficiencies. But you begin to see that the random forest model shows reasonable agreement between predicted and actual efficiencies, and similarly for the decision tree model. So you can begin to identify models that describe the data that's been published and tested in the literature. And you can also begin to see that with some of these models, the random forest model and the decision tree model, they basically show small errors compared to linear regression, which shows very large errors. So with these kinds of methods, we begin to identify the machine learning approaches that are likely to give good predictions of the properties of these perovskite solar cells. And then you can probe one step deeper and ask the question, what can I do to control the properties of the electron transport layers or the hole transport layers? And if I tune these by changing the thickness of these layers or thicknesses of these layers, you can see then I can begin to engineer even greater enhancement of photoconversion efficiencies in ways that allow us to discover new compositions and new geometries that are associated with higher performance characteristics. So with methods like this, we can now go in and start predicting the effects of processing or manufacturing parameters or layer geometry and characteristics in ways that allow us to design new solar cells. And then if you want to explore the effects of pressure, you can include the pressure as one of the effects that you study within a machine learning framework. And so with approaches like this, we've been able to develop world-leading efficiencies through group research activities that bring people from Africa into contact with people from other parts of the world in ways that put us in a domain where we can begin to think about developing not just solar cells, but solar modules. Now, you might say, well, efficiency is good, but we know that these systems are not that stable. In the early days, the systems that we tested had stability of about a week. These days, through the exploration of these methods, we've now developed systems that have stabilities of a year to 5 years. Part of this is what happens when you apply pressure during fabrication. And if you look at these results here that show power conversion efficiencies as a function of time, what you realize is that many of these devices can be stable for periods of 6 months to a year. And when you apply pressure, the stability is greater than when you don't. And you can go one step further, and this is the work of Tabiri Sumadu and Joseph Otibio, where they're basically looking at effects of carbon layers or carbon composite formation on the efficiency and stability of these devices. And what they've basically shown is that you can engineer systems with high efficiency with much enhanced stability. And through this work, we've now designed systems that we believe can have lifetimes of up to 5 years and efficiencies greater than 22%. And so with approaches like this, we can now begin to blend simulations and experiments and theory in ways that allow us to develop and design the next generation of stable perovskite solar cells in ways that then create the basis for beginning to think about what would happen if we could translate this into industry. And so if you look then at the whole idea of starting small, we can go from making cells to modules, and we can go from making modules to thinking about just issues of scale. So here we're showing you the map of the US, and I'm showing you a section in there that's 22,000 square miles. If you could make solar cells with efficiencies of 10%, you could power the whole US. In this case, we're talking about solar cells with efficiencies of 20%, with the kind of ideas that we're exploring. And you could certainly create enough basis to think about how you could power all of Africa. So I say this because it's important to put our work into context. It's also important for us to think about the group impact of the work that we're trying to do in a way that allows us to scale. Now, I want to move on and talk a little bit about energy storage. It's one thing to harness the energy, but we all know that it's critically important that we store that energy using methods that are scalable. So we're going to explore here the design of batteries, and we're going to look at these AI-enabled design of lithium-ion batteries with solid-state electrolytes. But you might ask, why solid-state electrolytes? We all know that there are challenges with liquid electrolytes in terms of inflammability and safety. And so one approach to designing more stable and safer batteries is to explore less flammable solid-state electrolytes. And so we're going to look at these lithium lanthanum zirconate-based batteries, and we're going to think about how you can design those compositions using machine learning, using databases that are out there, and really think through how this kind of work enables us then to begin to develop the next generation of lithium-ion batteries. Here, I'm showing the work of Bernice Abraham, who is a PhD student in our group, and also the work of John Aja, who just got his PhD working on these lithium-ion batteries. Now, so the basic idea is, how do we create then these lithium-ion batteries that can meet the growing energy storage demand? And how do we leverage these LLZO batteries as an example of batteries in which there's been significant global effort to generate data to demonstrate their potential? So just as we did before for the solar cells, we're going to use a data-driven approach. And in that data-driven approach, we're going to use machine learning to explore data that's been curated and cleaned. And then we're going to use feature analysis to identify the key features that really seem to control the performance. And we'll use different models to basically train the data, and then we'll test the models and compare the model predictions to actual measurements in ways that allow us to really determine whether we have an approach here that could enable us to do something novel. And so in doing this work, it turns out that what Bernice did, along with a number of others in our group, such as Elvis Chumesi and co., was to really comb through thousands and thousands of publications to extract the relevant information on materials, dopants, and synthesis parameters. And when you do that, you begin to realize that there's some dopants such as gallium, tantalum, aluminum that have been used to enrich the ionic conductivity of these solid-state electrolytes. And so with these kind of insights, you can also begin to test the relative importance of each of these key variables on the ionic conductivities of the solid-state electrolytes. and through this identify some optimum solid-state electrolytes that can then be incorporated in batteries that you fabricate using certain processing manufacturing parameters to have optimum energy storage and stability. And so with this kind of an approach, again, we can test our machine learning models and identify the ones that give the best predictions. And so from this kind of approaches, we identified the random forest decision tree models as the models that have the highest accuracy of prediction. But we also showed that the light, GBM, and CAD-boost models give reasonable accuracies in their prediction. And if you look at the parameters that matter, it's the lithium composition and lithium site, zirconium composition, sintering temperature and time, and the ball milling conditions as well as the calcination time are the features of the greatest importance. And so with this kind of an approach, one can then begin to identify what are the top features that are needed to really control the properties, the ionic conductivities of these different batteries. And one can also begin to look at the partial dependencies of each of these processing parameters and compositional parameters, and then identify from this what to control in designing and making a better battery. Similarly, one can look at codependencies between ball milling time and lithium compositions and begin to see how the different types of result spaces can be engineered by the control of these processing parameters. And so with methods like this, you can control or look at the effects of sintering time, lithium composition, and ultimately you can identify the top 15 parameters in terms of different models if you really want to control the output in terms of ionic conductivity of the solid state electrolytes. So from this early part of the work, we were able to understand how processing conditions, which basically translate to manufacturing conditions, and composition doping elements can really be manipulated, guided by machine learning in a way that allows us to identify the best compositions for solid state electrolytes. And you can go one step further and ask, what if I now integrate those solid state electrolytes into batteries? And so you put an anode and a cathode on these systems. And so in our case, we use NMC cathodes and we use lithium anodes. And then you apply pressure to these, which bring the particles into closer contact that enhance ionic conductivity. And as you do this, you create batteries with enhanced energy storage and potentially enhanced lifetimes. And so with methods like this, guided by computational modeling to see the effects of applied pressure on these systems, we started to identify domains in which the pressure enables contact, but we also identified the regimes in which excess pressure causes cracking. And so by staying away from the cracking and applying sufficient pressure, you can enable sufficient contact in ways that enhance battery performance. So if you look here at the images that we show, at zero pressure, you have essentially almost no cracks. As you increase the pressure to about 0.26 megapascals, you basically end up with the initiation of cracking, and those cracks grow beyond that in ways that decrease energy storage capacity. And so with approaches like this, we're able to control pressure, we're able to look at specific capacity of the batteries as a function of pressure, and basically show that at the moderate pressure of about 0.26 megapascals, you optimize energy storage in ways that you can control. We also started the process of leveraging machine learning to guide the development of batteries of this type in ways that can form the basis for future efforts to take the knowledge from designing electrolytes combines them with the knowledge of studies on batteries to create the batteries of tomorrow. And these models that we show here, basically the KNN nearest neighbor model seems to give the best performance in terms of minimizing the errors. And using these kinds of approaches, we're now looking at various configurations for doing work on pouch cell batteries and larger scale batteries. So you may say, well, what's the big deal for Africa? It turns out that in the next decade, we will enter the era in which electric vehicles will become even more dominant in our societies. And what we want to do with this knowledge is to create the EV batteries of tomorrow, as well as the batteries for energy storage for homes of tomorrow in ways that can leverage research that we do as a group. And so for those of you that have interest in this kind of area, what we're looking for is group impact with a focus on translation that is guided by machine learning and discovery in ways that we can control, in ways that we can enable as a group. So I'm going to shift gear now and talk a little bit about the impacts that we could engineer through the application of machine learning to health. And I'm going to talk specifically about breast cancer. So breast cancer accounts for about 30% of all female cancers. It has the highest incidence of all types of cancers, and it's expected to rise by almost 70% in the next 2 decades. Why this is not fully understood, but there are certain indications that suggest that there are certain environmental factors that are precipitating this high rise in breast cancer. Now, the big challenges are in cancer detection or diagnosis and also in cancer treatment. So in the case of cancer diagnosis, we don't have enough available tools to detect cancer early. And so it means that many cancers are often determined and detected at late stages. And at that point, it's often difficult to have real solutions. And then the other problem is that many of the treatments that we have actually were not developed for Africans. And actually, a lot of them have drug targets that target receptors that are not actually found in African women. So there's a need, therefore, for research with a focus on cancer, and especially on cancer in Africans, both in terms of the detection of the cancer and also of the treatment. So one example of a fairly simple approach that could be used is the idea of using a needle to aspirate out some blood, which can be done in any clinic across the world. And this was first explored in work that's often now characterized and stored in the Wisconsin breast cancer data set. And so they found that by taking the blood samples that they extracted and analyzing those blood samples with optical microscopy, you could determine certain characteristics of the blood cells. So the radii, the perimeters, areas, compactness, smoothness, concavity and convexity of the cells, the fractal dimensions and texture can be characterized relatively easily in these samples. And so by doing this, one can now begin to do some analysis, and this was what was done by the Wisconsin data set, collecting thousands and thousands of data points from many, many people. And so if one looks at those data sets and analyzes them with machine learning, what you can basically do is come up with models that can predict the occurrence of breast cancer with accuracies of more than 95%. And so this is work that was done by Stephen Price, working under the supervision of Prof. Rodica Niamtu and myself. And so we then started to ask the question, what about immunohistochemical staining? And here, in work done by David Clement and Professor Emmanuel Agu working together with us, we started looking at immunohistochemically stained images and came up with this idea that if you have multi-resolution images with different levels of resolution that you obtain, you can use deep learning to study a bag of deep multi-resolution convolutional features that describe the structure of the tissue. And when you now apply machine learning, especially deep learning approaches to these data sets, then you can begin to develop an approach with 99.99% level of accuracy in the ability to detect breast cancer. And so in this work, what we have done is to basically show that this deep pool of multi-resolution features increases our ability to detect cancer to levels of resolution as high as 99%. And with these kinds of approaches, we think we have something that's potentially clinical that can be translated into practice. And so currently we're working with the folks at the National Hospital in Abuja, where we're basically working in collaboration with them, with folks like Teresa Ezenwafo and Jonathan Madueke and Dr. Amin, to really develop a database that's rich in data from people of African descent. And by the way, what we're finding with those studies is really quite remarkable in terms of the signatures of cancer in African people. Now, I just want to give you some examples of some of the results that we found with regard to breast cancer tissue. If you look to the top left, there's an image of a normal mammary breast tissue. And you see that the features are very distinct around the boundaries and the structure is very much intact. If I now look at the grade 1 breast cancer tissue that we find in the context of Abuja, you find that that tissue begins to degrade and the boundaries begin to degrade. By the time you get to grade 2 cancer tissue, the structure is very significantly degraded. And you can see that the well-defined structure for the normal tissue is basically half destroyed. And as you go to grade 3 cancer tissues, these features are further destroyed. So even from the naked eye, I can tell the difference between a normal breast and a breast cancer degraded tissue from grade 1 to grade 2 to grade 3. Now, can we obtain even more information? If you look at those same tissues and you stain them, what you begin to find is you can begin to detect receptors of different kinds on the surfaces of the tissues. So the normal tissue, for example, shown here, reveals basically the structure of the normal tissue. If you look for something known as luteinizing hormone releasing hormone, what you find is that as you go from grade 1 to grade 2 to grade 3 breast tumors, the amount of that LHRH increases with increasing grade, which means that we can now begin to use that LHRH as a marker of breast cancer in African women. It also means that many of those tumors that do not express the typical targets for Western women, such as estrogen receptors, HER2 receptors, and progesterone receptors, can be ignored, and instead we can begin to target these LHRH receptors that are overexpressed in breast cancer tissues, especially in African women. So what does this now mean? What this means is that if we have a good understanding of those receptors, we can make nanoparticles that target those receptors. If those nanoparticles are magnetic, they can enrich our ability to do magnetic resonance imaging. And if those nanoparticles are gold-based, they can enrich our ability to do laser gold interactions in ways that become very viable for us to image the tumors or to treat the tumors. And here we're showing you some results from animal experiments on the bottom right image, where the enrichment in contrast due to the targeted magnetite nanoparticles significantly increases our resolution and our ability to detect breast cancer in tumor xenografts. Now, I can also take cancer drugs and target those LHRH receptors by basically putting LHRH targets onto the molecules of the drugs. And so we've done this with two drugs. One is prodigozine that we grow in our lab, and then the other is paclitaxel, which is a commonly used cancer drug. If I now use this to target tumors at the early stage, mid stage, and late stage, I can then watch to see the extent to which the tumors shrink depending on the application of the drug. If I have the targets being targeted by the LHRH to bring about the interaction between the LHRH and the LHRH receptors, what you find is quite interesting. So if I look at this image that shows tumor volume as a function of time, then the yellow line shows what happens when you have no drug. The tumor simply grows, and obviously in the end, the mouse model, the mice die. If on the other hand, I apply prodigozine or paclitaxel drugs, which are in red or gray, then I shrink the tumors, but when I run out of drug, the tumors grow. I shrink the tumors, but there's a tendency for the tumors to grow when I use untargeted drugs. On the other hand, if you look at the light blue, turquoise, or green, if I have a targeted drug where I'm targeting the LHRH receptors, I shrink the tumors and I eliminate them within 8 days after 2 weeks of tumor growth in a xenograft. So what this basically shows is that we can develop targeted cancer drugs that target receptors that are overexpressed on the surfaces of breast tumors, especially those that are common to women of African descent. And we can do so in ways that minimize the toxicity and also ways that minimize the side effects of those drugs. And so with these kinds of approaches, you can see that there's huge potential for us to begin to develop the targeted drugs to target not just breast cancer, but other kinds of cancers, using drugs that target the receptors that are endemic and associated with the forms of diseases that are found in African people. And when we do that, we have the opportunity to develop a new generation of drugs. And again, we can enhance those processes by different machine learning and AI approaches. So I want to move forward now in the last part of the talk and present a new world in which we can develop material databases for the design of alloys of different kinds. And so there's a new generation of alloys known as high entropy alloys, where instead of having dilute mixtures of 2 or 3 components, we have multi-component alloy systems where you have high entropy or medium entropy associated with those configurations. And those materials have remarkable combinations of strength, ductility, toughness, and performance characteristics that we can engineer in ways that can benefit from the applications of machine learning. So what we did was we boldly took all of the data that's been generated for high entropy alloys and put them together in a database. And this is work that was started by Desmond Clenham, who really did a lot of the heavy lifting in putting together a lot of the data, and then supported by Elvis Chumasi from KNUST and Tabiria Sumadu to really pull together that massive database. And we assumed that you could describe all of these materials by that one database. So within that database, you have alloys with 18 different elements possible across the composition space, various composition ratios of each element, and also we denoted the types of phases that were associated. We then trained that database to then allow us to identify compositional spaces that result in different properties: hardness, strength, ductility, density, Young's modulus, etc. So with that massive database, we then began to test actual predictions from the models with measured or actual ductility. And what we essentially found was that we could train that database, and with certain types of models, especially the random forest, KNN nearest neighbor, we were able to get reasonably good description of the variability in the predicted and actual values of ductility and modulus, of hardness, and also of density. And very interestingly enough, also showed that you could get very good predictions of strength. And in this case, if you look to the top right of these strength predictions, you found that we can actually identify compositional spaces with strengths, ultimate tensile strengths greater than 2,500. In fact, the highest UTS values that we found with this kind of an approach was materials with strengths, ultra high strengths of about 4,000 MPa. So with these methods, you can now begin to identify high entropy alloys with remarkable combinations of strength, ductility, and toughness. And we can also begin to think about undiscovered compositions that have the possibility of ultra high mechanical property combinations in ways that are enabled by machine learning. And you can go one step further, and this is the work of Desmond Clenham, where you can begin to think about recycling different elemental compositions in ways that enable us to then use a Sankey diagram to show how we can recycle scrap into high entropy alloys with attractive combinations of properties. So not only does this allow us to develop pristine new alloys, but it also allows us to create new value from scrap in ways that enable different types of applications from different combinations of materials. So the big question then is, okay, beyond the research, what does this really mean for Africa? So I'm showing here a sort of mineral or resource map for Africa. And what you see here is that every country is blessed with mineral deposits and waste materials of different kinds. But the real question is, can we create industry from these mineral deposits by translating from minerals to materials to wealth? And I show the picture here of Aliko Dangote, who is Africa's biggest producer of cement. So he's one person that created industry out of aluminosilicate deposits. So the question is, can we have in each country the capability not just to mine the material, but to process them and manufacture things out of those materials in ways that create wealth? And when you create wealth, you create good jobs for people to process, to add value to those resources in ways that are enabled by industry that creates good jobs for people. And this, in my mind, is our biggest challenge and our opportunity. And it's true not only for our mineral deposits, but it's also true for our energy deposits, where if you look across Africa and you begin to look at our energy sources across Africa, you find that if you look at the region from Egypt down to Kenya, that has a third of the continent's energy needs in the form of geothermal energy. If you look at the region across the Sahara Desert, that has a third of the continent's energy needs in terms of solar energy that could meet a third of the continent's energy needs. And now if I look at the single drop of the Congo River, that has a third of the continent's energy needs just from the single drop of the Congo River, which means that all the oil that exists in the Gulf of Guinea, all the coal that exists in South Africa, and all the oil that's now been recently discovered between Mozambique, Tanzania, Kenya, all the way across to Sudan and Niger in terms of energy and gas reserves, and the uranium wealth of Niger represent excess energy capacity for Africa. So the question is, what are we going to do about this? And how are we going to enable a new era in which we think strategically about these resources in a way that will enable us to use these resources, enable AI and machine learning and approaches like this to develop a true energy strategy? And as we do this, I think we should be thinking about manufacturing not just in the same way that has been done before. And so at SUNY Poly, one of the things that we've done is to establish the Global Center for Advanced Manufacturing and Materials, where we're trying to use AI-based design of alloying and processing, AI-guided repair and training, blended with cyber-secure environments, to really connect to robotically assisted manufacturing methods that will take away the need for pure experience and replace it with digital experience in ways that we can connect to the generation of the next set of real products across the world. So as we think like this, I think there's an opportunity for Africa to leapfrog. There's an opportunity for us to think about how we can make the next generation of materials, process them, manufacture them, coat them in ways that create true value. But it requires all of us to come together to bring our strengths in modeling, experiments, together with practical approaches that scale in a way that leverages digital manufacturing in this next generation. So as we think about this, we should think about this not just in terms of applications to regular materials and manufacturing, but we should even think about how we do agriculture. And so in this case, I'm showing the work of Kene Mbanisi, who's a professor at Olin College in Massachusetts, that has designed with his students a new form of robotic tractor that uses different approaches to plant and to harvest. And can you imagine if we take this approach and blend it with new ways of packaging and preservation of food right there at the farm site in ways that create no value? Or can you imagine new efforts in which we leverage robotically assisted manufacturing for semiconductor manufacturing, for logistics, for construction, in ways that could enable a new frontier or the next frontiers for AI and robotics and African problem solving? And so what I challenge all of you as young scientists to do is to imagine not just a successful career for yourself, but a career inspired by purpose. And the purpose is simply one in which you use your knowledge in collaboration with others to really try to find solutions that could enable us to solve real world problems and develop Africa. Today, I've shown you just a few examples of how that could be done in terms of solar cells, batteries, cancer detection and treatment, or even the development of new alloys, new materials. In each of these areas, what I've learned is that you need to bring together people who share a common value, who really want to solve these problems, to create solutions that scale. And as you do this, I want you to think not just about publishing the results, but also how we transition from ideas to industry and industries that scale through accelerators that allow us to grow from small to large. And in the case of all of you involved in the Young African Scientists Group, I believe with all my heart that you represent the talent, the knowledge, and the capacity that we need to invest in as we transition these ideas from where we are today to where we want Africa to be within one generation. And for those of you that are interested in the kind of approaches that I've described today, we'll be happy to collaborate with you because we believe that it is in coming together with our different talents that we can really create the solutions and the opportunity to enable the development of Africa. And so with that, I will be happy to answer any of your questions. And I thank you for this opportunity to speak to the Young African Scientists Group. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much for your time. So now it's time, it's the Q&A session. Please, you can indicate with your hand. Okay, Abdi, I see Abdi. Go for the question.
Right. Please, I hope you can hear me.
Loud and
Yes,
clear.
yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead, Abdi.
Thank you so much, Prof. That was quite extensive and informative. My name is Latif. I am actually a graduate student in the King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals in Saudi Arabia, and I'm specializing in renewable energy. So I would speak to the first two uh, areas that Prof spoke about, solar cells and then energy storage systems. I think Prof, I mean, we are young scientists, and then most of us, go outside the country for high quality education. But definitely we are connected to our base, our roots, and sometimes you want to really apply the learnings to solve an African problem, but it's often the case that, especially for I have had to work on forecasting tasks using machine learning approaches, and it's mostly the case that there's a fall short when it comes to high resolution data, especially in the context of Africa. You are well traveled and experienced, and amazing work that you have done so far with your group. I just want to know, I mean, do you foresee, how do you think this challenge can be bridged? Getting access to high resolution data for purposes of machine learning applications in the context of Africa. I just want to, thank you so
So,
much.
one of the great opportunities of doing this kind of work is that there are databases across the world that are accessible to all of us, no matter where we are, including those that are in Africa. So those databases that I talked about today for solar cells, for batteries, and for materials designed were actually developed by many people who are operating from Africa. So one of the nice things about this is a lot of those databases are accessible. What we need to do, though, is we need to come together on different platforms with a purpose. So, for example, to be honest with you, my purpose in life now is to see how to translate what we're learning from those databases into how to manufacture those electrolytes, and also how to translate those to different battery applications across the world. Now, you may say, why not only in Africa? It turns out that what we need to do is to create value that helps not just Africa, but it also creates intellectual property that is valued across the world. Now, if we come together as Africans in these kind of platforms, and we leverage the knowledge you have and the knowledge that each and everyone else brings, it will not take much before we create major forces that can be global players in this domain. And in a continent that has 1/3 of the Earth's elements, that what that creates is tremendous power. But it does require us to think not just as individuals searching for our success, and I understand that all of us, of course, are really working hard to survive and thrive, but it requires us to think in a Pan-African way about how we collaborate to build this capacity, not just for ourselves, but for a new regime in which industry is built that leverages this knowledge. And the advantage of machine learning AI is that data is accessible to people all across the world. Anybody with a cell phone and some determination can access it. And as we begin to build our own databases, what we want to do is to make those databases accessible in a way that allows us to operate as a continental group. So you, with your experience in Saudi Arabia, doing this kind of work that you're doing in renewable energy space, would be welcome, as is anybody else with similar interests. And I encourage all of you to think African and Pan-African especially as we build future platforms and as we engage these approaches also that enables us to avoid some of the challenges we have when we try to do experimental work alone. Nkechi?
Thank you. I want to acknowledge a very big thank you to Professor for the extensive and encompassing delivery. It's large. Like, my name is Nkechi Ofshakalu, and I am an exchange scholar at WPI. I'm quite interested in the area of energy storage because presently I'm working on batteries. And I want to say, especially with the work that Professor presented, that Dennis Abraham is doing, I quite appreciate the innovation and the new knowledge in this area. But for me, as a starter, I would say my appetite is whet. And when it comes to like employing this area of machine learning to battery materials. But my question goes, I'm beginning to have interest in how to employ ML to detect or predict my battery cathode material stability or the cycle life, the end of cycle life of my cathodes. And being someone who is just getting exposed to this new knowledge, what is the most practical way that I can start as a person to get this incorporated in my own area of research? Personally, I'm working with sodium-ion batteries.
Thanks, Nkechi. It's nice to speak to you. My suggestion here would be to identify somebody with capability in machine learning. And at WPI, where you are, you certainly have a few experts, such as Professor Rodika Niamtu and others, who can advise you on the machine learning side of things. And then to combine that with somebody who has understanding of experimental phenomena that can be linked to the degradation processes. And when you do that, you can come up with a scheme where you start looking at features associated with degradation and appropriate machine learning approaches to linking those to some decision making framework. So this is something that is very practical, very doable, and could, of course, be then tied to an innovation that really looks at not just battery degradation, but of course, ultimately lifetime management. So if this is something you want to talk about some more, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll be happy to facilitate some introductions or help with the framing of these problems. Kireme.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Prof, for your great deliberation. My name is Mohammed Kamara from Liberia, and I work at the University of Liberia from the Department of Material Science and Engineering, which was initially passed by the faculty member and also supported by Prof. And Prof, we are grateful to have this kind of platform where we can channel our ideas, scientific ideas, I did listen to your explanation, but actually my focus is on high entropy alloys. But I'm asking a question based on the Perovskite battery, where you did mention that in order to have large storage capacity, you have to increase the pressure. But then from moderate pressure to a high pressure. But then when you increase the pressure, it will induce a crack. So in that light, how do we control the crack mechanism, which is being increased by the external pressure on a battery? That is my question.
So ultimately, what we're trying to develop are process design maps where you have some control over temperature, that could be annealing temperature or duration, applied pressure, and chemical composition parameters. And so in those process design maps, there will be some limits that you will be advised not to exceed as part of the process of designing your manufacturing or process design. And what we're essentially doing here is the first step in optimizing those parameters. And so you see from the studies that we do that the processing spaces are bounded to keep them away from this failure phenomena. Now, in the next generation of work that we hope to do, what we will be looking at will be equivalent other ways of processing to achieve good performance characteristics. So the question is, can you use some combination of sintering and ball milling to achieve properties equivalent to what you might achieve through pressure and annealing, etc., etc. So essentially what you want to do with these kinds of studies that we presented is to use them to identify the boundaries that you don't want to exceed as part of your processing and heat treatment parameters to make better batteries or better electronic devices of the type that we showed today. So you can see these results as kind of identifying some of the spaces you want to stay away from as you design the processing and treatment conditions that are associated with the preparation of the devices. I hope that answers your question, Mohammed.
Definitely, Prof. Thank you ever so much.
You're welcome. Kireme Williams.
So,
I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly.
So,
Or is that
that's
is that Mohammed?
Right, Williams. Yeah, Sammy Williams. Please, can you hear me?
Williams. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
So I'm grateful to my classmate Asumadu at senior high school for having given us the opportunity to also join this presentation. I work 3 years as an education officer, and in fact, I witnessed some few days ago a presentation of craft and cultural heritage exhibited by students in my district. And the kind of craft that I saw over there, some innovative things that I saw over there were very overwhelming. More importantly, I've also seen a guy in Ghana here who is trying to dry cocoa seedlings with a machine that the young guy is trying to produce by himself. But my concern here that I want Prof to also try to help us is that in Ghana here, we do more theoretical in the education system rather than doing the practical work. So how can you
Sorry, I can't hear you.
I think Prof, we lost him there.
But I think the emphasis on how do we move from the
How the
theory-based.
company can also help.
Okay.
So if we can also help try to motivate our curriculum developers to also change the way we also learn in Ghana here. We can get a lot of talents to also help in this situation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think the question was to do with doing a lot of theory without practice and application. So if you notice in almost every component of today's talk, I presented some theory, some experiments, some modeling and machine learning, right? So what I believe in personally is to help us understand, we need to have some combination of theory, experiments, machine learning, and modeling of different types. But we should focus on how we bring those together to achieve impact. And so there is room for each one of us to play as part of a team that has a clear goal of the impact that we want to have. And so in Ghana, for example, let's say your impact is on cocoa production or coffee production or whatever it is that you have, you should be thinking about how do you form the best team to achieve that goal, bringing together the people in different areas and getting them to appreciate the value of having a clear impact through the collective contributions of people with different backgrounds. Where things fail is when the work is all theory with no practice, right? Whereas if you really have the right approach of theory and practice and collaboration with a clear goal of the impact you want to have, then I think we can really see a lot of opportunities for many groups across the continent to truly succeed. So, Kreme, I hope I answered your question.
So we will take
the last. I'm okay with that, Prof. I'm okay with that. We are planning. We hope that Ghana will sustain in this way.
Okay, Sylvester.
Yes, Prof. So we'll take
How you doing, Prof?
the last two questions, and then we'll allow Prof to enjoy his holidays. So, Gono, please go.
Okay. Prof, thank you very much for your deliberation. And I am Sylvester Gono. I am my research area is energy storage material, but I have a little concern out of my research area because there's few times our president in Liberia passed or executive order, he signed it and restricting the rubber products that Liberia is known for the production of rubber, so that the rubber should be processed before leaving the country. This turn our Liberia industry now to put them on. So it put the research in Polymer at the front of Liberia students now, especially in material, because the president said that the rubber that will be produced in Liberia should be processed before leaving this country. So it brought little concern in the area of Polymer, and you deliberated, especially from my research area in all the area, but you never touched Polymer. So we would like to include Polymer in this. If any of our friends will be interested, so they can have research in there, because Polymer has come at the frontiers of Liberia industrialization. So, Rob, I think you got to do something about it now.
Yeah, you make a good point, Gono. I think there's certainly the need to enrich the polymer work that we do for many different applications. And in the case of rubber, I can tell you that many of the processes for processing rubber and adding value to rubber are already well known and well established. So that's one of the areas that I think the new Department of Material Science and Engineering at the University of Liberia should really focus on. And I will be happy to connect you to some of the people in that area, as well as maybe think of ways that we can engage more polymer research within our framework. You're right. Today was only a limited coverage of possible types of materials, but I really hope that as this group goes forward, you will also invite polymer experts and people who can think about new ways of creating industry with different classes of materials to enrich the potential discussions for the future meetings of the Young African Scientist Group. But you should reach out to me and let's talk about this. And I'll be happy to share with you some contacts and some suggestions on how to proceed in this area. Okay.
Thank you, Prof.
We take the last question from, is it Fight? Please go ahead, Fight. Fuad.
Fuad, do you have a question?
All right.
So, if you have a question, please go ahead.
I think his audio is giving him problems. So thank you very much, Prof. This is an amazing interaction with you. And I thank everybody that was present today. The recording was done and we are going to post it on the Engines website. The link is in the chat and it's also on all platforms. So thank you, Prof. We really appreciate the time that you've taken to spend with us. And we hope that in the future, as we go ahead, when we call on you, you'll be with us as well. So thank you very much, everyone. And Prof, your last words, then we close.
Thank you so much, Tabiri, and thank you, Desmond, for the invitation to be part of the Young African Scientist Group. I really, really appreciate the work that you're doing as part of the group to really nurture and socialize the next generation of African scientists and engineers. I just want to share with you what I've learned from my own short career and lifetime of 70 years. So what I've learned is you blink and 40 years goes by. But the things that are in your heart that really motivate you and you devote your life to matter. So as a young scientist, of course, most of us are worried about how to make a living, how to get a good job. But I want you to imagine 30 or 40 years from now, and just imagine the impact that you want to have. And as you imagine that impact, find yourself in a favorable environment with people that have similar values and work hard step by step, collaborate and exchange, and always be open to new ideas. And I could tell you that if this group does that as a group, the potential for doing amazing things that will impact Africa is enormous. But even more important than all of this and all the success in the world is you will live a life of fulfillment. And so think African, think global, work collaboratively, and really believe in what we can achieve as a group. And know that the IRIS team, with a lot of very, very accomplished Africans in different ways, will be happy to come and interact with you in different fields and share their life experience with you in ways that will make a difference. And as much as you receive, give back to the next generation in a way that will produce the Africa that we all dream of. So thank you so much for this invitation to be part of this group. I really appreciate the work you're doing. And if there's any way I or any member of the IRIS team can be helpful to this group as we go forward, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
All right,
so
Prof.
Take care. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof. Let's stay around for the next round of announcements for the upcoming programs and The team that is organizing this and the teachers that will be teaching the various courses are here. So Desmond, please go ahead and introduce us to the next.
Thank you so much, Tabiri. I must say that putting this whole program together, you've just been hearing some few people's name have been mentioned, but these are the following people that we want to thank so much. Dr. Elvis Chumesi, Dr. Sarah Ekia Safo, Dr. Senyo Frank Kojo, Benice N. Abraham, Trustin Enekwe, and then Tabiri, you can also mention the professors from SUNY. You have their list with you, then I can make the announcements.
Yes, I think Prof. William is gone, but he was around. And then we also have Nesta. You forgot about your guy, Nesta.
And I'm gonna talk to that soon.
Yes. So I think that's all. So you can just wrap
Okay.
up.
And also, I think one dude was talking from King Fahad. So your contact person over there is Dr. Nesta Anka. You need to reach out to him. He is also on this call. And then when you go to, they've shared with you the link to the Young African Scientists, yaslinkup.com. When you go there, you will be able to see other members. We've not introduced them here, but they are there. You will see them and the various things that they are doing. Like we said, we want to create a critical mass. Now, for us to start, we will be starting in the coming weeks. We are starting with AI. We are using machine learning for a lot of activities. And this is going to be a very intensive project-based learning that is contextual. So we are hoping that when you get into this program, by the time you're finished, at least you would have written a paper or you would have done something very tangible. So we'll be looking at projects and how you can use machine learning for agriculture, machine learning for alloy design, machine learning for forecasting, machine learning for finance and econometrics. So, and we have about 10 to 12 projects that this is going to be organized across. You'll be taught, you'll be given the fundamental things that has to happen. And as the names come in, I'll be mentioning them. I know we also want to thank Professor Kojo Mensa Dakwa from KNUST, who is also part of the group. So you can see that we want to stop talking and start doing. So once you sign up for this course, you're not just going to be learning machine learning, but you'll be learning this and you'll be using this on a project so that you can become very competent. And we have very competent teachers that will be taking us through. So we have Dr. Elvis Chumesi, who is an electrical engineer by profession. We have Trustin Enekwe, who is a postdoctoral fellow but has done a lot of work using machine learning for various applications. We have Benice Abrahams, and then we have Senyo Kujo, who is a statistician but have used machine learning in pharmacology, finance, and things like that. So please, when you see the groups, make it a point to participate. Participate fully. We just don't want you to get a degree or get a certificate from this project, but we want you to be able to use this to solve a real African problem. Now, we need to, and those of you who have still not joined the platforms, please make it a point. Sign up for the training and then make sure that you are participating fully in this so that at least we can develop the critical mass that we are looking for to be able to help solve the challenges of Africa.
So thank you very much, everybody, for coming around. And if you have not registered, once again, go register so that you can join the class next week. And link will be posted for us for the classes. So next week, we start introduction to machine learning and AI, and all the classes will be recorded. There will be an assessment for all the classes at the end of everything, and a certificate will be awarded. So please take it seriously. and put yourself in it so that you can apply the machine learning to whatever that you're doing. The courses are not going to be focused on any research area. It's going to be agnostic, and you can apply it in the various areas that you do your research. Thank you very much, and see you next week. Bye-bye.